We're facing a really big, a big evil force, just like the Vietnam War or anything else that's really overpowering. And it seemed to me that during the Vietnam War, until millions of people worldwide came out against the war, we couldn't stop it. And sometimes I feel the same thing about all this nuclear stuff, that it's so big, it's so entrenched, it's so evil, there's so much money behind it, that until we get a massive, pretty much global force of people out in the streets, that it's not going to stop it. Now that's happening in Japan. Why isn't it happening here? Does it have to happen to us until we can have empathy for people that it's happened to, or to realize that it's going to happen here sooner or later? I mean, what does it take to wake people up, and what does it take to get young people involved? I see 3 young people here. You know, there should be a whole, this is a campus. This should be filled with young people. I don't know what it takes to get people motivated, get people involved.
Just an unofficial comment, but a friend of mine who works at Bruce Power, he was telling me that he used to think there was 99% chance of not having an accident there, but since the new management has been taken over, whenever that happened, a few years ago now, he thinks that's down to 75% because they're fast-tracking operators. So it's a sobering thought when you live in a community.
When they do these refurbishments of the reactors in Canada, as I told you, the whole interior is very radioactive, and there's thousands of pipes that have to be removed. It's not only the pressure tubes that go through the core of the reactor, but also at both ends they're attached to what are called feeder pipes. And the calandria types, there are calandria tubes around the pressure tubes. So there's actually thousands of pipes, and they're all highly radioactive. Over 500 workers who are just ordinary tradesmen who are hired for the job of coming in and doing some of this welding and cutting and removing of pipes were told that they didn't have to wear any protective respirators or protective equipment because the radiation levels were so low that it was harmless. And as a result, for weeks they were working in an environment where there was plutonium dust in the air which was invisible, that was coming off these pipes that they were removing. So there are about 500 workers who now have a permanent body burden of plutonium in their lungs, which is totally unnecessary. And again, nobody is charged, nobody is, I believe it's criminal negligence, because people knew about this. Nobody's charged, nobody is rebuked, there's no fine, there's no anything. And these workers have to live with this for the rest of their life. When I tried to contact the workers to find out about this, I was threatened that I would have my ass suit off if I talked to any of them. Because, and they're all under threat not to talk to anybody. Or they will lose their job and lose whatever kind of compensation package the company might give them. So this is another example of the kind of behavior which it's shocking to think that such behavior would be tolerated.
Why does it exist?
I don't know. I guess it's just because they were able to get away with it. And they've been able to sort of they tell the workers on the one hand there's nothing to worry about, it's not really a health hazard, but there's no independent evaluation or advice given to these workers as to what the real health risks are. I believe the real health risks are very serious, but they're being told there's nothing to worry about, and if they keep their mouths shut, they will keep their job, and they will also be able to, perhaps get some kind of financial compensation.
I would just like to pick up on comments. It seems a lot of the nuclear industry is in existence for war, and I think we really have to stand up against war in our world for peace. And I have read, I do a lot of spiritual reading, that we are now we're moving into a world of peace, and we have to get out of the fear vibration which our governments are keeping us in, so that we will go to war and keep this whole war machine going. We have to say no, and we have to say peace is possible and start speaking to our enemies and befriending them. And maybe that will stop. Maybe once there's no war use for nuclear, then the electricity industry will vanish as well, and all these other complications. So I seem to be hearing that. And from our standpoint, I mean, our government has gotten involved in war, too much to the distaste of most Canadians, but from our perspectives, the U.S. is so heavily involved in the war machine. And all over our world, we have to move beyond this into a world of peace. So let's connect on this part of the agenda as well. Thank you for bringing all that to our attention.
But I had a question, that I asked this several years ago, and I don't know how to frame it exactly, but when a nuclear power plant is going to get built, my understanding was it can't be started until the basic underpinnings, you know, the concrete foundations and all that sort of thing for it to sit on are built. But they can go ahead with that before they get approval because those aren't considered part of the nuclear power plant. In other words, the construction can start without approval. Is that correct?
NRC Commissioner Merrifield, Jeffrey Merrifield, his last act as NRC Commissioner was to do a huge favor to the nuclear power industry that wants to build new plants, and that was to change the definition of the word construction under NRC regulations. So all of that construction you referred to there, that's not related to the reactor or its radiological containment, is not considered construction under NRC regulations. Therefore, no need for an environmental impact statement. Go ahead, do it. It's called limited work authorizations. It's
Okay.
all pre-construction activities.
Well, this is my follow-up question on that. If the amount of money that's going to be spent on it is being bankrolled by the taxpayer, if this is considered non-construction, how can they bill the taxpayer for it?
Because they've already passed the CWIP bill. Because they could do any pre-construction, financing, or anything else.
But then it's not nuclear specifically, it's...
Sure, they don't need to have the license to do that. They just need to, they can start spending the money up front before they can file for an application.
If your state has CWIP, I remember.
Yes, if your state has that, and there's a few states that have a moratorium on CWIP, Missouri, Indiana. Missouri is actually trying, their legislature is trying to overthrow that moratorium on CWIP, and Iowa doesn't have it, so there's a few states. So there has been talk in the industry that they don't need the guaranteed federal loans to build these new nuclear power plants down in the southeast, but they couldn't do it without the advanced rate making or the CWIP. So they can start doing that, and they can lay some foundations, they can pour concrete, they can dig holes.
But they still have to finance it themselves.
Sure. No, they don't. They can, because they've already got this legislation passed. You're
Seems
paying
like
for
they're
it.
using both ends.
Absolutely.
They're talking about both sides of the mouth.
Contrary to your definition.
Do Michigan and Ohio have CWIP?
Here we go. Yes, caution, caution, caution. The Cook Nuclear Power Plant over on the western side of the state of Michigan, it's Michigan, Indiana Electric, and what they have put forward was a request to the Michigan Public Service Commission. They want the ratepayers to pay for the upgrade of the plant, the modernization of the plant. They want close to $2 billion. So they're going to modernize it, try to squeeze more power out of it, and get the ratepayers to pay for while they're doing it. So this is the camel's nose under the tent. This is precedent setting in Michigan, and we need to stop it now because that's what Fermi 3 is waiting on, is the quip. So if the Public Service Commission approves it for Cook, my gosh, they've already set a precedent. Look out, here comes the Fermi.
Is that problematic if Cook stopped over in Indiana, not like Michigan?
Well, yeah, you get to incur the risk in Michigan, but the power goes elsewhere.
Just, you know, there's been a theme of victories. Gordon was talking about writing a book about victories, which he needs to do because we need to celebrate our victories. And some victories, Victor just mentioned, Indiana, there were 2 nuclear power plants under construction. Ground was more than broken at Marble Hill on the Ohio River. It was largely constructed. And up in Gary, a plant called Bailey, ground was broken. And it was illegal to do CWIP in Indiana, but the utilities were doing it anyway. This was in the 80s. And Citizen Action Coalition of Indiana, Chris Williams, executive director, they took it to court and won. And the utilities, this is $1980, was ordered to return $300 million to the ratepayers of Indiana. So adjust for inflation, double that, $600 million of today's money, returned to families of Indiana, like $2,000 checks waiting in your mailbox, returned to you. It killed those reactors. It stopped both of those plants.
Yay.
And I just wanted to say another big victory. We didn't talk a whole lot about the nuclear loan guarantees. Barack Obama himself, giving it the highest possible profile, announced an $8.3 billion nuclear loan guarantee for those 2 new reactors at Vogtle, Georgia, that are under construction now. The amazing thing is, not only have we stopped the approval of tens of billions of dollars more in nuclear loan guarantee authority, but even that one that's been awarded and announced has not been finalized. And it's because the company, Southern Nuclear, does not want to put any of its own skin in the game. And Southern Alliance for Clean Energy did a Freedom of Information Act request that it took years to finally obtain. And they learned that all that was being asked of Southern Nuclear was an amount of money to the tune of $17 million, maybe up to $52 million of their skin in the game to secure an $8.3 billion nuclear loan guarantee. And they won't do it because they're so lacking in confidence on their own project that they won't put that much money into it. And the thing I forgot to mention about NRC Commissioner Jeffrey Merrifield was, after he changed the definition of the word construction under NRC regulations, he then went to work for the Shaw Group, which builds new nuclear power plants. So he wrote his own paycheck.
I believe in both Canada and the States, the nuclear industry has really created a state within a state, and the nuclear regulator in both countries is really a part of the nuclear industry. They are part of the nuclear industry. They draw their staff from the nuclear industry largely, and they really are true believers. They believe in the importance of nuclear power and the future of nuclear power and the necessity of future power. It's almost like a cult. And their job is to grant licenses, And if they want to hold the licensees accountable, it's only to improve their performance so they can grant more licenses, so they can get the industry in better shape, but not to stop. And never, at no point, does either regulator in either country have the idea in their mind that they might actually stop something. They want to try and license it and make whatever accommodations are necessary to get those licenses approved. I think that the big cheat here is the complete abdication of responsibility on the part of society at large to hold these people accountable in a democratic, accountable way. We don't do that. And the result is our elected officials, in both countries, they say, oh, I never even think about nuclear power because I don't have to. Because there's the NRC or there's the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. That's their job to look after that. It never has to even flit through my mind. And this is where we as citizens are failing. We as citizens should insist that the people we elect are people we elect. We should insist that this is a political issue that is on their desk every day. And we're not doing that. So I think that we have to look at ourselves. Other countries which have fewer advantages and no free press and so on have managed to do things like in the ex-Soviet Union, in apartheid, South Africa. Other places, people have actually taken action and made sure that it's a political issue. We just are not doing it. So that's the answer, I think, is that we've got to do it. And this idea here that this gentleman has brought forward, Mike, about reaching out to elderly people, to citizens who are being affected by the bad economics, that's the kind of thing we have to do. Don't follow the behavior of the industry and think that everybody has to think alike in order to join in the struggle. Different strokes for different folks. I mean, different people are concerned about different issues. Some people are concerned about health. Some people are concerned about renewables. Some people are concerned about their pocketbook. Fine, address them on those issues and get them mobilized. I think that's what we got to do.
I just would like to finish the story of the NRC. Why do they give these licenses? Why do they do that? It isn't just greed in some generalized sense. It's my understanding, and I just wanted you to clarify it, that they get most of their budget based on license fees that they charge. So we need to understand how the money flows into the NRC if we're ever going to get a hold of this, and maybe you could sort of add to that picture with some detail.
90% of the budget from the NRC comes from the nuclear industry, so they're paying for their regulator.
But do they get it through licensing fees specifically?
Yes.
So then what
Yes.
would be the motivation for them not to get a license?
Right, it's a classic regulatory capture. The industry has captured the regulator, and they're not a regulator any longer, they're a promoter. And they're all geeked up about a new generation of nukes. You saw them breaking ground, they're all smiling. It's about perpetuating the bureaucracy. It's about job security for them. It's not about doing their job and being a regulator, it's about the money.
And where does the Congress figure into that, if at all? Is there,
Yeah. Well,
so they're running.
by and large, Congress gives prostitution a bad name.
Had this leak, that they've actually installed flood control berms around the control room. And the only thing I can figure is they're worried that instead of 35 gallons per day, which was the worst of the leakage we know about, it was feared that the whole thing could let loose. 300,000 gallons of water. So they're trying to protect the control room. The leak into the control room was being caught in buckets. There was actually a bucket near the central control panel catching leaking water at Palisades. And NRC's position has been, because the irony is we met with the chairman of the NRC on May 25th, immediately after he toured Palisades. It wasn't until June 12th that we found out about the leak. But the leak was immediately announced as having been going on for months. So we asked the chairman, did he know about the leak? And if he did, why didn't he tell us a couple weeks earlier? And if he did not know, why didn't he know? Well, it turns out he did not know. He was being kept in the dark not only by the company, but by his own staff. So there are investigations galore going on as to why he was kept in the dark, how serious this leakage is. The most recent leak, I mentioned there's been a few, involves the control rod drive mechanisms in Palisades, very safety critical pieces of equipment, controls the nuclear reaction actually. This is a through-wall leak that happened on August 12th, again shut the plant down for about a month. Turns out, Dave Lockbaum, the Union of Concerned Scientists, had written a report 2 years ago about 40 years of control rod drive mechanism leaks at Palisades. Unique in industry. Other plants fix the problem, Palisades repeats the problem again and again and again, countless times. Those were seal leaks. What's significant about this one is it's through wall, and it's an indication of how age-degraded Palisades is. Palisades, I would argue, is perhaps the oldest operating reactor in the United States because it got its original license in 1967, making it 45 years old this year. Never mind that the first 4 years were lost because it was a lemon. They couldn't operate it. It was so badly designed and built. And the last thing I'll say about Palisades is a complete collapse of safety culture. You mentioned safety culture earlier. Again, because of the whistleblower revelations, we learned that there had been an internal safety culture assessment at Palisades. 74% of the workforce fears raising safety issues to management. 74%, including management itself, is afraid to raise safety issues at Palisades. Compared to, let's say, a 10% level of safety culture collapse at Millstone in Connecticut in the mid-1990s, caused the shutdown of that plant. So here we have a problem 7.5 times worse at Palisades. They are operating at 100% full power as we speak, just as is Davis Besse. So that again is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. No regulatory control, nobody really cares. They are allowing very dangerous reactors to operate at full power.
I live out in Iowa, and I can't really say that we're actually in this watershed, but we're in the Mississippi River watershed, which is the longest river in the United States and one of the largest rivers in the world. 104 reactors, they all have problems here in the United States, and gosh knows all the ones in Canada do as well. And what do we want to do? We want to build more. And why? I think Michael already alluded to it. It's money. I've been working with the Sierra Club on nuclear power for a few years. A new bill came to Iowa about 3 years ago that Mid-American Energy, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, which is mostly owned by the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, wanted to build a new nuclear power plant in Iowa. Well, of course, we don't need nuclear power in Iowa, a new plant. We're #2 in the country in wind production. And we don't even need that because we're exporting most of that wind power. So we really don't need more power, but they want to build a new nuclear power plant. And why is that? Michael said it's about money. It's always about money. Now, the nuclear industry would have us believe that nuclear power is clean, safe, and cheap. And matter of fact, they used to say too cheap to meter. Well, we all know that that's not true. None of that is true. We've basically been talking about the clean and the dirty here, but the expensive, I would say, and a lot of people would say, maybe the Achilles heel of the nuclear power industry. Wall Street won't finance these things. They know they're not a good investment. Their investors will not finance these. They're not a good investment. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, the third richest man in the world, knows a good investment when he sees one. Would he put his own money into a new nuclear power plant? No. But there's one sucker left, and that is the ratepayer, and that's us. So nuclear power would not exist without three types of basically subsidies. And the first is the Price-Anderson Act, which is the insurance that basically allows self-insurance by the industry that allows these 104 reactors to only pay, what is it, $104 billion is their total liability. 10.4 billion, excuse me. So, yeah, by a factor of 10 there. So they all pay in. Well, what would happen if we would have a meltdown like Fukushima? What's the cost going to be? They're talking about trillions of dollars, not 10.4 billion. Where would that additional money come from? Would come from the ratepayers. So that's a major subsidy that we would have to give. The other one is this federal loan guarantees. And this is how we have what's called a nuclear relapse going on down in southeast part of the country, in Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas. And those are being largely financed by two things, and that's those federal loan guarantees and a really nasty piece of legislation called QIP. And it stands for Construction Work in Progress. I prefer to pronounce it CWIP because it sounds more painful, because it really, really is. And what that allows these utilities to do is to pre-bill their ratepayers for the financing costs, the construction costs, basically pre-bill the nuclear power plant and put it into their rate base before it's producing electricity. Normally, we're not allowed to do that. Normally, there's a utility standard regulation called used and useful. They normally need to put into service the power generation before they bill it. But this CWIP legislation allows you to bill it ahead of time, and they say that it's going to save you money over the long run because the financing costs and all sorts of other things. But what we're really happening is our utility bills are going through the roof especially South Carolina. It's had 4 rate increases or 5, excuse me, in the last 2 years. They're trying to overturn these things, but what we had in Iowa was we need to stop this legislation before it even started. So we put together a coalition in Iowa, and we basically kind of started looking at what the deal was and who would higher rates hurt the most. And we realized at first that the environmentalists that were fighting nuclear power because it's dirty and dangerous, we didn't have enough horsepower. You know, our legislators are bought and paid for by, the utilities. They get basically whatever they want. So we said, well, they're going to get this because they had the governor on their side and the leaders of both parties in both houses. So they thought they were going to get their bill right away. So we sat back and figured out that the elderly, the fixed income, and the poor were going to be hurt by rate increases the most. So we built a coalition, not around nuclear power, but around rate increases and who they would hurt. So a few of us organizations like the Sierra Club, and then I also contract with the Friends of the Earth, we continue to talk about dirty and dangerous, but most of the rhetoric around the whole bill was just about the economics. And so we had many partners, including the AARP, that didn't care about nuclear power. What they cared about was the effect of this bill on their membership and on the ratepayers and the taxpayers of the state of Iowa. So we have been successful for 2 years in a row stopping this bill. But it is coming back again because it's about the money. It's not about nuclear power. Building nuclear power plants is about money. And people say, well, I don't quite understand that. And I said, well, let's look at it this way. I want you to give me your credit card that has no spending limit on it, and I'm going to go buy a car, and I'm going to buy the most expensive car that I can buy because you're paying for it. And here's the kicker. Because utilities get a rate of return that's guaranteed by the Public Utilities Commission, in this case the Iowa Utilities Board, of somewhere between 10 and 15%, I'm actually going to get a rebate on that car that you paid for, and I'm gonna get a 15% rebate. So instead of buying the Yugo, I'm gonna go buy a Mercedes, and then I'm gonna get a rebate on it as well, and you paid for it all. Now, what's even more heinous than that you paid for it, is that if it gets canceled, which there's about a 50% chance that a nuclear power plant is put on the drawing board, 50% of them have never been built. They get to keep the money. Now that's legalized thievery, I think. And this is the sort of thing that we need to stop. And I believe that the lawsuit in Florida that's going on right now that's trying to overturn this CWIP legislation is kind of based on that notion that it is thievery, that you have some elderly people that are paying up front for something that they will never ever get, because they're not going to live long enough to see power, one electron from a nuclear power plant, even if it is built. It would probably take 10 to 20 years, and then, you know, the likelihood of an 80-year-old person living to see a new nuclear power plant, what are the odds they're going to live to be 100? So there's just some really, really bad things going on out there. We're trying the best we can to stop it in Iowa, building a large coalition that's really not about nuclear power, but about the economics of this bad legislation. And of course, the Southeast, Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas are trying to overturn the legislation that is currently building 2 nukes down there. So look forward to your questions if you have any.
Great. So question.
I'm so afraid that we're going to have our own Fukushima in this country, and God forbid, and God bless the people that live around that area. What is going to be the sacrifice zone? Is it going to be the Great Lakes? Is it going to be Georgia? Is it going to be Canada? What is it going to take? I'm afraid that it might be a massive meltdown, and I don't want to see that. But Americans, I mean, they would rather watch a reality show than care about anything that really matters.